Rhett Lewis here with Cameron Wolfe and Nick Shook as we wrap up our roster reset series by taking a look at the AFC South, looking at offseason moves as we have done for all 32 teams and draft needs as we are nearing the start of the 2022 NFL Draft live from Las Vegas, April 28th. And a reminder that you can read more on the roster reset series over on NFL.com/roster reset. And there, you will find our good pal, Nick Shook, lending his brain and literary prowess to all of the teams in the AFC over on NFL.com. Minnesota Vikings come back to you on that 14th overall pick with the Ravens here in a moment. But, Nick, back to you to close out the offseason grades with the reigning AFC champion, Cincinnati Bengals, who, look, clearly got the message with the offensive line need, right?
I can hear their entrance music now. The defending AFC champions, the
Yes.
breaking of glass, the Stone Cold Steve Austin entrance. Doing the roster reset this week, the top three additions I listed for them were all offensive linemen. They got the message. The message was loud and clear in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl when they were unable to protect Joe Burrow adequately enough for him to lead them down the field for a thrilling victory. And they went out and responded in kind. They get Lael Collins, who I think they capitalized on the Cowboys cutting ties with him to save some cap space. They go get Alex Kappa. They add Ted Karras. They add depth. More importantly than anything, they add depth. They add experience. They add guys that they can count on and throw in there because they ran into this issue multiple times in the postseason last year. You had Hakeem Adeniji at right guard, and then you had Jackson Carman at right guard the next series against Kansas City because they couldn't rely on either to properly pass protect against a team that was getting after Joe Burrow. So to fill this void is a big step for them because the rest of the pieces are there. That's what we saw. And the two
Certainly.
biggest hurdles for guys are you got to have the pieces and you got to stay healthy. They stayed healthy last year. Now they've added pieces. If they can stay healthy again, I think they continue to be a contender and maybe they prove that they're not a fluke. They're not a flash in the pan. If anything, they've definitely made the effort toward proving that in this offseason.
Yeah, and by the way, Nick, wouldn't hate it if their first choice in this year's NFL draft at number 31 overall was another offensive lineman.
Yeah,
Best
why not?
available out there. I mean, maybe it's Zion Johnson out of Boston College. How do you see some of the areas in which they could go there at 31 and beyond, Nick?
I think that makes sense, maybe on the defensive front as well, just because I think about the
Sure.
departure of Larry Ogunjobi. I know they like to stick with who they had, but that added some depth there that was really helpful for them. So, but I would love to see offensive line. I don't think you can have enough offensive linemen. It's like baseball; you can't have enough pitching. You can't have enough
Right.
offensive linemen because you lose one guy. I mean, they lost Riley Reef late in the season last year, and it became one of their biggest weaknesses that we saw. So you can't have enough depth, and developing guys for the future is always a good thing.
All right, Cam, coming back to you here with the Ravens as we come back up the division now and looking at Baltimore sitting at number 14 overall. And there's going to be a really good player available there, maybe on either side of the offensive or defensive line. There's a bunch of different ways that GM Eric DeCosta could go. What do you see as some of those possibilities?
Nah, I started in the trenches where you mentioned. I remember a game I covered last year that puzzled me the most. It was a Thursday night football game we did, the Dolphins Ravens game, and that was when the Ravens were coming in super hot. Everybody was talking about Lamar Jackson as an MVP candidate, and then the Dolphins went zero blitz, zero blitz, zero blitz, and it broke everything. And so, although we talk a lot about the defensive side of the ball and they have to get better there, you can't have enough offensive alignment. So it wouldn't bother me at all if they sat there at 14 and took the best offensive lineman, whether that's a Trevor Penning out of Northern Iowa, if he's there, if Charles Cross falls there from Mississippi State, or even if they wanted to do interior offensive lineman like a King and Green from Texas A&M, I wouldn't have a problem with any of those picks. But if I were in the GM circle, I'd probably go and try to find that edge rusher who's on the board. And some of the top guys are going to be going in the top five. Your Hutchinsons, your Trayvon Walkers, who's getting a lot of buzz. But maybe you get a guy like a Jermaine Johnson from Florida State there, sitting there at 14, and he can fill a role. If you like George Karafelis from Purdue, he's probably going to be a guy that's there at 14. So those are some names to me that make sense for a Ravens team who could not get after the passer, that just really stop the pass rush. That's where I'd start. And I'd say one other thing. This is a team we talked in the past about what made them great. Why not go out and get that middle linebacker spot figured out? If you love one of these two guys here in Devin Lloyd or N'Kobe Dean, your offensive line is not right for you. You don't want to reach at an edge there in a deep edge class. Maybe you fall in love with a Devin Lloyd or Nakobe Dean, and he fills that middle linebacker spot for you for a long time.
Interesting that you mentioned that. I just did a piece for NFL.com assessing need versus best player available for all 32 teams. Well, really not for all 32 teams, but for all 32 picks in the first round, because 8 teams are without a first round pick, by the way. And for the Ravens, this is using PFF's mock draft simulator, Pro
Yep.
Football Focus. And basically the two choices that PFF gave me, the need choice was Devontae Wyatt, the defensive lineman from Georgia. This is, again, more of an interior guy, but still with plenty of pass rush productivity and possibility at the next level, considering his athleticism. And then the best player available was Devin Lloyd, who you could also argue is a need there from Utah. And I ended up going with Devin Lloyd in that spot. And I think that would be, certainly a way that they could go, unless they see value in the linebacker position, maybe into the second round, where guys like, Quay Walker and Chad Muma and other linebackers might be available there. So there's definitely some options there, all really good ones for the Baltimore Ravens. And then with that, Nick, let's go back to the Browns here, who will take the night off as it stands currently on night 1. But once we get into day 2, they're back on the clock in the second and third rounds. What a couple of positions that they could look at there.
I think you got to look at receiver. You got to look at edge rusher, depending on what happens with Clowney. But I think even down the road, you got to look at edge rusher. Yeah. I know they went out and got Chase Winovich, but that's a depth guy. You look at the defensive front, because the rest of the defense makes sense for the most part. For the last few years, have looked at the roster and thought, you got to add a linebacker. Now, they went and got Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah last year, and he turned out to be a stud. But that's not the middle linebacker that I'm still seeking. They re-signed Anthony Walker. So I still think somewhere in there, and then especially with this class, there are some value, as you just mentioned. They could add somebody to be a playmaking type of guy, and it can be there beyond the 1-year deal that you keep signing a guy like Anthony Walker to. But I think you got to look first at receiver because of what we already discussed, and you have to look at edge because of the importance of the position and pairing with Myles Garrett. Because the one thing you don't want to get caught doing is having to face an offense that's going to dedicate 2 blockers, whether it's a tackle and a tight end, a tackle and a guy chipping, whatever it is, to Myles Garrett. That might give you an edge on the offensive side, but you got to have a guy who's able to take advantage of that situation on the opposite side. So I think that you really need to look at that spot as well. If I had to weigh between the two, I still think wide receiver is more important. Just because of the way that their units played last year. But again, there's a lot of unknown with this team because you're mixing in a new quarterback. I expect a bit of a scheme change. We'll see how that reflects. Either way, if I were to do a mock, it was coming right out of Indy. I thought Sky Moore, if he's there in round 2, is a great fit for them. I don't think Sky Moore is going to be there.
But it's a deep class. Right. Yeah. I think you're right. In fact, in that piece that I was mentioning, using the PFF mock simulator on NFL.com, I actually had to give Sky Moore to the Lions at number 32 in the first round. So some other wide receiver names to look at. David Bell from Purdue, I think would maybe give the Browns something they don't have at that position, which is a little bit more of the physical type of guy. You've got the burner with Anthony Schwartz. I look at John Mechie from Alabama. George Pickens from Georgia, another big physical guy. Khalil Shakir from Boise State. Or if they're waiting until the third round, Alec Pierce and Wan'Dale Robinson from Cincinnati and Kentucky, respectively, 2 of my favorites in this class. But all good options there, Nick. Thanks for that. And let's finish this on the draft here with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Cam, who have been at all the quarterback pro days, right? And definitely making that not hiding anything there. I think it's clear that they're definitely considering a quarterback here with the 20th overall pick in this year's draft. You think that's right at the top of the board here for the Steelers?
Oh, I absolutely do, Rhett. I'd go as far as saying I'd be pretty surprised if they don't walk out of here with a quarterback. Given what we've seen from the Steelers organization, they want stability at that position. This is a franchise that has had Big Ben for much of the last 2 decades. Before that, they had Terry Bradshaw for over a decade. They want to have that stabilizer at the position. And you've heard Mike Tomlin talk about mobility. They're actually at a really good draft to have maybe a 20th pick. This is a draft where you probably don't want to take a quarterback in the top 5 or 10, but there's going to be one of those 4 available at 20 and probably multiple of those 4. So, whether it's a Matt Corral or a Desmond Ritter. I think those are probably the two of the names that are a little bit more realistic for them. I think Malik Willis ends up going top 10. So I was there at Matt Corral's pro day with Mike Tomlin, and nobody else, a coach or a scout, spent more time talking to Corral than Mike Tomlin. And you could, we all can make our conclusions on that. Maybe it means nothing, maybe it means something, but I did see value in that. They personally, him and Kevin Colbert, wanted to go to all of the top pro days and wanted to do their due diligence here. So I see that being their result there, and I think that makes sense. I did my little look through the AFC, and you can legitimately put 12 out of the 16 teams in the playoffs this year, and that's not even including the Steelers. And so you have to look at a path, not only this year, but going forward. How are you going to consistently be a contender? And it's not going to be with Mitch Trubisky. So you're either going to punt on this year and wait till next year, or you got to make the plunge. And I do think they make the plunge at number 20, or even trade up. They have their full allotment of picks. If a Malik Willis or whoever they love falls there somewhere towards the back of the top 10 or outside of the teens, why not see them make a trade up move? So I think this is the move that we all anticipate, and I don't think it'll be a shock on that Thursday of draft weekend.
Yep, I think that's fair. And look, it's just a matter of, how does their quarterback board shake out? And if 3 are gone by 20, do they really have a high enough grade on the fourth guy, to make him that 20th overall pick? That's how that's where it's hard to get inside a GM's head and really know how they value, those players at a position. Whereas, do they take the fourth best quarterback or, the fourth best edge rusher? You know what I mean? Like, those types of debates are some of the things that you have to weigh here at this point when you get into the 20s and beyond in the draft. Okay. Go ahead.
And it's interesting, Rhett, real briefly, you hear all the BPA versus need conversations, right? But if you talk to people in the league,
it's always best player available.
Yeah. It's always best player available. Unless all of a sudden the quarterback's there. So I believe the best player available unless a quarterback's involved. And then the quarterback is almost never the best player available on the board.
Yeah. Well, now last year you could say that's a different argument, but this year is kind of a unique class, for sure. But I think that's a fair point.